For 80 years, they were partners in the fight against hate. Now, that partnership is completely over. And the man who ended it, well, he says he's just getting started. So today, we're going to break down not just why this all happened, but what it signals about the future of law enforcement in America.
And there it is. That's a direct quote from the new FBI Director Kash Patel. And let me tell you, that's not just a statement. That is a declaration. It's a sign of a totally new era for the FBI, one where old alliances are being torn up. When this news broke, it sent absolute shockwaves through civil rights circles. You have to understand, the ADL wasn't just some partner. For generations of FBI agents, they were a go-to source for intelligence on extremist groups. To just cut off that data pipeline, well, that's a massive operational shift.
But here's the key. You can't look at this as just a single decision. Critics are arguing that this is one piece of a much larger strategy by Director Patel to completely redefine what the FBI even considers a threat. This was not a random move. It's a sign of a tectonic shift.
Okay, so how on earth does an 80-year partnership just collapse? To really get it, we need to look at just how deep this relationship was, and then pinpoint the exact moment it all started to crack.
And we're not talking about some casual professional relationship here. This goes all the way back to the 1940s. It gets formalized by J. Edgar Hoover himself in '68. And by the 2010s, the ADL is training over 12,000 law enforcement officers every single year. This was a deep institutional bond.
So what was the straw that broke the camel's back? Well, it all came down to one document, the ADL's Glossary of Extremism. Now, for the ADL, this was a vital tool to help cops track hate. But for conservative critics, it looked like a political hit list that unfairly targeted their views. And this right here, this disagreement over who gets to define extremism, is what blew the whole thing up. The ADL's response was fast and defiant. Their CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, he didn't back down an inch. Instead, he basically said that with anti-Semitism on the rise, their work is more critical than ever, whether they have an official FBI partnership or not.
And that brings us right to the man at the center of this storm, Director Kash Patel. Because you can't understand why this decision is such a big deal without understanding the man who made it and the agenda he's pushing.
Patel's own words really paint the picture. He talks about lobbyists begging for a phone call, and his response was just a flat no. That's not just a rejection, folks. That's a power move. It's sending a clear signal that the old way of doing business in Washington, it's over.
Look, this decision didn't just happen in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger playbook. 1, reshape the agency. 2, go after groups he sees as partisan. 3, end these old NGO partnerships. And 4, totally shift what the FBI's national security priorities are. Which, raises the biggest question of all. If the FBI is turning away from the threats that groups like the ADL have been tracking for decades, what or who is its new #1 target?
And here's your answer. The break with the ADL isn't just about ending something, it's about starting something new. It's about taking all those resources and aiming them at what Director Patel has now declared is the #1 threat to America, fentanyl. And he's talking about this threat in a way we have never heard from the Bureau, ever.
I mean, just look at the numbers. They're devastating. Over 100,000 overdose deaths a year in the U.S. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for Americans between 18 and 45. To Patel, this isn't just a public health crisis. It is a full-blown national security emergency. Now, listen to the language here. On a recent podcast, Patel didn't call it a drug problem. He called it chemical warfare. He called it strategic lethality. Those words are not chosen by accident. That is a deliberate reframing of the fentanyl crisis as an active war against the United States.
And this is why he sees it that way. He's looking at the supply chain, and it's a global operation. It starts with precursor chemicals made in China. They're then shipped off to Mexican cartels for assembly, and then it's smuggled across our borders. To the new FBI, this isn't just drug trafficking. It's a coordinated international attack that requires a totally different kind of response. Which brings us right back to the central question in all of this. With the ADL on the outside and a brand new enemy #1, who now gets to decide what the FBI points its resources at? Who sets the lens?
So what really changes day to day? Well, the impacts could be huge. Without the ADL, the FBI loses this massive fire hose of intel on white supremacist and anti-government networks. And critics are warning this could create some really dangerous blind spots. The training for new agents, that's going to change. And maybe most importantly, the very definition of extremism is now going to be decided entirely in-house. So what happens next? It really seems like we're heading down one of two paths, and each one has a serious trade-off. Path 1 is a narrower scope. The upside? The FBI gets cleaner intel without what it sees as political noise from outside groups. The risk? Missing the exact domestic threats those groups were tracking. Path 2 is a tighter clamp. This lets the FBI move way faster against its new targets, like the cartels. But that speed comes with a huge risk of its own: politically motivated overreach.
So here's the bottom line. This whole story isn't just about one partnership ending. This is about a fundamental rewrite of who gets to define what a threat is for the FBI. It's a massive shift in power, away from outside watchdogs and toward an agenda set directly by the administration. It's a rewrite of who sets the lens.
And that leaves us with a really tough question, not just for the Bureau, but for all of us. What's the right balance here? Should the FBI operate with complete independence, setting all its own priorities? Or does it need the check and balance that comes from these outside partnerships, even when things get messy? The answer to that is going to define the next chapter of American law enforcement.